Hey everyone, on the show today, former cricketer, current broadcaster and commentator extraordinaire, Mark Nicholas. In this episode, we do a deep dive into the state and the health of cricket. What has to happen for cricket to continue to thrive, for this lovely game that we all love to reach new heights of popularity and entertainment. We chat about the pinnacle of the game. What is the highest form of accomplishment? In Mark's opinion, especially with the One-Day International World Cup on the horizon. We chat about his transition from being a professional cricketer, entering into broadcasting and commentary. And what I particularly like about this is Mark's candidness with which he speaks as he reflects on his very successful career with a degree of humor as well as humility and realism in terms of how he could have improved, how he has improved, how he's learned from previous mistakes. And this is quite humbling coming from a man who is really at the top of his field and at the top of his game. I really hope you enjoy. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you on the other side. Nicholas, thank you very much for coming on. I really firstly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share some time with me this Monday morning.
What, my busy golf schedule?
Your busy golf schedule. But you've been busy with the Aussie South Africa series as well, so I thank you very much firstly and welcome.
Thank you for having me in this great club. What a history this club has, isn't it? Durban Country Club. I mean, I first came here out of school, you wouldn't believe it. I was captain of an England schools side, and at the end of the tour, I came to Durban and stayed for a week with a guy who was a member here. He was an old friend of my mother's, I think, or something, and he brought me here for dinner one night, and then also for a squash game. And that was very glamorous and very serious and very old-fashioned, actually, in its rhythms and disciplines. And once I got to the youth hostel down the road, I didn't get back here, sadly, but I never forget the first steak that I had with a glass of red wine at Durban Country Club.
Fantastic. There was a common theme in your book as well. You wrote a book, A Beautiful Game, My Love Affair with Cricket. And you mentioned Durban in there a couple of times, links to friends in La Lucia, two famous cricketers who hailed from KZN. One of them who you spoke about at length with Barry Richards. So it's nice to see that there's a link to Durban and you keep coming back. So it's wonderful to have you.
Yeah, there is a strong link to Durban. The book actually isn't particularly South Africa-centric because it was commissioned in Australia by an Australian publishing company that does have an English arm. And the consequence of that was I focused more on Australia in my early days than here. And I thought when I do a follow-up book, I'll focus much more on South Africa because in a way, it was almost more formative. I had 3 winters here, the one I've just mentioned after school, when I stayed in that YMCA up the road, and then I came back and I captained a team on the Bluff, Grosvenor, Finland, on the Bluff, and that was a great experience. Actually, I didn't make many runs. I bowled and took wickets, but I didn't make many runs. I think being captain and coach and new ball bowler and number 3 batsman, it was just, I'm not Jacques Kallis, let's face it. It might have all just been a bit much for me.
Mark, the title, At My Love Affair with Cricket, it certainly came through strong in the book that you do indeed love the game extensively. So why do you love cricket so much?
Well, it's been the main part of my whole life, is the simple answer. My father was a good club player. My grandfather on my father's side was a first-class player for Essex. And so when I was very little, I was already playing in the garden with my dad. He took me to my first Lord's final, the Gillette Cup final of 1967 or 8. And then very rudely, he died a week later. And so the thread that he had begun with cricket was how I coped with his passing. I wrapped myself in cricket to part deal with that, I think. There was a musical thread too. He was a fine musician and I'd taken up the guitar, but I'd been the guitar in a sort of angry and rather odd reaction, I think, to his loss. But cricket became, I read a lot about cricket. I was reading quite serious cricket books when I was like 7 or 8 anyway. I'd read Don Bradman's The Art of Cricket by the age of 10, which was a serious coaching book. I watched every ball on TV. Every test match we played in the garden with mates, the hours of play was set entirely as they would be in a professional match. So my mother had to have lunch ready on the dot of 1:30.
Yes, I read that, yeah.
Tea ready on the dot of 4:10, and the close of play was at 6 and all that stuff. So I think that's why, probably. It wasn't until I wrote the book that I traced it back. So I sort of began to work it out, really, and work out how I'd coped with losing my father so young. And then, of course, I wanted to play professionally, and then I wanted to write, and then I wanted to commentate. And I just pursued those journeys, and here we are. It must have worked, because for some bizarre reason you want to do a podcast with me, and I guess this is the reason.
Yeah, absolutely. When I started the podcast, I sat down and I outlined some names who I really wanted to touch base with if I would get the opportunity, and yours was certainly up there from a broadcasting standpoint and from a commentary standpoint. I watch a lot of Test cricket personally. That's my favorite format of the game, and I've always enjoyed your commentary and then how you lead your respective teams whilst broadcasting. So yeah, I was super excited to find out that you would be willing to come on. Mark, another thing throughout your career, there's a thread of leadership that comes through, in the sense that most of the teams that you represented, you invariably ended up captaining, and extensively with your run at Hampshire. I think we're close on 10 years you were the captain there.
More than that. It was actually close on 12 years. So I took over midway through 1984 and finished at the end of 95, which is 12 summers, but as I say, it was halfway through the 84 summer that I took over. And I was about to say it was probably too long. Was it too long? I mean, it's probably others who should judge that. I felt I still had something to give and stuck with it a long time, because, with each period there are different challenges. So by the end, it was about bringing on young players and having a proper succession plan for when I finished, and being ready to go when that was sorted. Whereas in the middle, it was more about finding a way to win trophies, which we did in one-day cricket, but never quite the championship. And at the beginning, it was about a sort of dynamism that I wanted the team to play a certain sort of cricket. I wanted us to attack, to play matches only to win. So if that at times meant foregoing a drawn game, I would set up the opportunity to win and take the risk of losing. And I wanted to bleed that into everybody's thinking so that we were on the same page. So there were sort of 3 phases to it, I think. And I'm not saying they divide into groups of 4 years, but I definitely think they explain why I did it for so long. And then suddenly I was ready to not do it anymore, almost not so much having had enough of it, but almost knowing that I had nothing more to give it, even if I wanted to continue. I'd also injured my shoulder, so I couldn't throw the ball. Well, you get found out in the field pretty quickly in first-class cricket if you can't throw the ball. So there were 2 reasons, and it was a very easy decision. It just, one day, it was time to retire, which is, a good thing, really. Rather go when they ask why, not when. Although I think with me they were beginning to say when,
When.
probably.
Yeah, you want to retire on your terms. Eh?
Yeah, well, yes, and on terms that suit the people you've been with for so long. I mean, you know, in those days, the captain of a county cricket club was very involved in running the club day to day. Perhaps too involved, actually, to the detriment of my own performance. I think I did too many things, and I think a lot of the players, friends of mine, not critics particularly, but a lot of the players were beginning to think that I got too involved, particularly in the development of the new ground and the marketing side of that, and also in the major decisions about players and contracts, and you know, and they felt that was not so much taking up a lot of my time, but was to the detriment to the mental side of my cricket. I wasn't as focused, for example, on my batting as perhaps I ought to have been.
Okay. You mentioned that your attacking mindset as a captain. How do you feel if we take that to a modern day reference point of the English cricket side now, and how the Test side in particular, and how they've chosen to approach the game under their new leadership?
Well, I've thought about that a lot. What they've done is different from what I did. So, yes, I wanted to play attacking cricket and keep the game alive and look to win and look to entertain. So that's part of their ethos. But the brilliance in the Stokes-McCullum axis is ridding the players of the fear of failure. And pretty much anything in life will be done better without the fear of failure. I think it's a great business model. I think a lot of people go to work wary of their boss, wary of the challenges ahead, concerned about the people they're going to meet and how they'll perform in front of them. I think if you can rid them of that fear, you'll improve their performance. Of course, in sport, you know, you're involved, obviously very involved with golf. If you hit a golf shot without any care for the outcome of the shot, you'll probably hit a better golf shot.
Yeah.
In other words, if your shoulders are loose, arms and hands, so the grip's loose around the club, and you get a flow to your golf swing because you're not holding on to the shot, you're going to hit a better shot, I would say. And that is the incredible thing, that when they walk out to bat, every one of them, you know, even the new faces like Ben Duckett last summer in the Ashes, every one of them seems to have the ability to play that way. Now, you know, it's one thing to have the ability, it's quite another to have the mindset. To add the mindset to the ability, and then see them when they're out, not look especially bothered, as if it's all fine and it's part of the master plan, is genius. So though I hear what you say, there was an element of the way I went about my cricket that could be related to the way they go about their cricket. If I would say at times I was guilty of putting people under too much pressure, of losing it a bit when we played badly, and of overhyping it when we played well. And there was too much of that, certainly in the first part of my captaincy career. And I think the players wanted a steadier, vital sign, rather than, you know. But I learnt about that. I got better at that. I was a better captain, a better man manager in the second half of my captaincy career, but a more exciting tactician and a more attacking captain in the first half.
What makes a good leader, in your opinion? And then a follow-up to that, who are the leaders in cricket that are playing at the moment who you admire and, you know, have the admiration of their fellow teammates and public?
Clarity of message, empathy with the human form, the ability to create a collegiate feeling within a dressing room, the need to see that every cricketer has a slightly different role and almost certainly a slightly different level of performance. So the height of Ben Stokes may not be the height of Chris Woakes. That isn't to say Chris Woakes can't achieve Ben Stokes' height, but it's not the general parameter. So the ability to understand where the player sits at the level of his own performance and how one man's excellent day may not be quite as brilliant a performance as somebody else's, but maybe as relevant to the overall team effort. So I think to understand that and weigh that up, and I think that's an overcomplicated way of saying not everybody can be Barry Richards or Malcolm Marshall.
Yes.
I think they're the key things. I think probably nowadays you do have to perform at a high level yourself. There was a time, particularly in England, where people were chosen to captain a team because of their captaincy ability rather than their playing ability. And I think there are obvious examples of it. I don't in any way mean to diminish his play as a batsman, but Mike Brearley was not necessarily a fully fledged English batsman, but as captain, he was worth his place in the team. I don't think you can do that anymore in the modern game. There isn't a recent example of it, and I think there are good reasons for that. So I think they're the key things. There are other things that aren't so important. I mean, I think if you're a good communicator, it sure helps. I think if your general messaging in the public space is positive and enjoyable and communicative, then that sure helps. But I don't think it's crucial. And the best examples of it, well, I think Ben Stokes is unbelievable. I mean, I admire that guy so much. I think to, all the best captains and people and all-round cricketers and attacking batsmen and game-changing performers, I can't think of any that are necessarily better than him. It's funny, I was in the car driving with Barry only the other day. We were going to play golf in a sort of celebration event for 100 years of Kingsmead. And we got talking about Stokes, and even Barry said, he said, I can't really think. I mean, Sobers was obviously an incredible cricketer and the best Barry said he ever saw. Jacques Kallis is clearly a magnificent all-round cricket player, but do even either of them quite have Stokes's match-winning ability, willpower, power of personality that impresses itself upon the moment, and best of all, ongoing ability to do it when it matters. On the big occasion, the Ashes, the World Cup final, Newlands against South Africa, and so on and so on and so on, Stokes does it. I think he's absolutely extraordinary. And when you think what he's been through, so Stokes would be my number one, probably, of the moment.
Yes.
And as I look back through my life, there are a few. I mean, one has one's heroes as a kid growing up. In South Africa, they were Barry Richards and Mike Proctor. At home in England, first they were Ted Dexter and John Snow. And then I've had plenty through my life. Sachin Tendulkar. I just loved watching him play cricket. Imran Khan. There's a host of them, really. The captain, perhaps I admired most in my time, was the Australian Mark Taylor. Mike Brearley was something else as a man, really fascinating just to watch. And watch him think. You could almost see him thinking, if that makes any sense.
Yes, you see the cogs turning over.
Yeah, exactly that. So there's a number of them, and I've probably forgotten some. I mean, we were all inspired as kids or young cricketers by Ian Botham's heroics. He was a natural match winner. I played with Malcolm Marshall a lot and captained him right in his pomp, and he became my best friend in cricket. And I felt an enormous energy and spirit every time I was with him. And when he died, I was asked to give the eulogy in Barbados, which was perhaps the greatest honour I've ever had in cricket, really. So there's a few.
I'm sure.
It's
Yeah.
always hard when you're suddenly put on the spot and then you leave something like this and you're walking up the drive there and you think, oh, I didn't mention. Oh,
And then all the names come flooding back. Yeah. No, I understand fully. I understand. In your book as well, you mentioned luck. So pertaining to your captaincy, and I remember there was a quote there. I think it was by Richie Beno. But thinking about Ben Stokes and how the great players often seem to get lucky, in inverted commas. How much of a role do you think luck plays in success? And if I had to cite a particular example for you in your broadcasting career, I think you were on, you'd just been brought on to 9 in Australia, and Anil Kumble was bowling to Adam Gilchrist, and you suggested that he bowl, I think, to switch from over the wicket to around the wicket, and then he clean bowled him the next ball. And I was just wondering what you think about luck, if you have a philosophy on it, and if it is in fact luck.
Well, you've done your research well, I'll give you that. Actually, he was bowling round the wicket, and Gilchrist was getting into him, and I suggested he bowl over the wicket.
Okay.
So it's just the opposite of what you suggested, but the principle's right. Because I felt it was too easy for Gilchrist to use his arms, and because Kumble was a sort of overspinner of the ball skidded off the pitch. He got much more overspin than side spin. I felt it was too easy for him to use his arms, so he wanted to cramp him a bit and make him play across the ball from a tighter line, and it worked. And I don't know if that's luck. I think you make your own luck most of the time. I think there are lots of examples where it seems as if luck has gone your way, but nearly always that comes if you're playing well. It is odd that, the sides, winning important tosses and getting bowling in cloudy conditions, getting batting in sunny conditions, all those kind of things, they do seem to happen more to the team who's playing the best cricket.
It is weird, eh?
It is weird. And the old Gary Player line, the more I practice, the luckier I get, and all these kind of things. I think luck, it's probably where you are more than what you do, But then I suppose you could argue that you've got yourself to that place.
Exactly.
It was interesting. When Channel 9, you mentioned Channel 9 and me starting to work for Channel 9, which was just the most exhilarating and, at the beginning, frightening experience. I was in Australia watching the Rugby World Cup. I was covering England and Pakistan, and there was a break in the series. I don't remember why. I suppose in those days maybe they had a week between a test match, or between a test match and a one-day series perhaps, or maybe just a week's gap between tests. Anyway, I jumped on a plane to fly to Sydney and to team up with some mates who were there to watch the final stages of the Rugby World Cup. And of course England won it, so I was there in the Sydney Cricket Ground for that, the Johnny Wilkinson drop goal. And it was there that a friend of mine had said to a radio journalist who was perhaps the biggest voice, certainly on the eastern coastline of Australia, but perhaps Australia, a guy called Alan Jones, that I was in the country. And this friend of mine said, Channel 9 should be looking at him. And this guy rang up the chief executive of Channel 9 and said, I've got the next Richie Beno in town.
And you were there while he phoned him?
Yeah,
you were listening to that
Well, I
conversation.
went in to meet him. Okay. So my mate I'm talking about was Andrew Slack, the former Wallaby rugby captain. And Slacky said, you should meet Jones, he's an interesting guy. So he said, yeah, come in. And I went in and met him. And he just picked up the phone and rang the chief executive of Channel 9. And the Channel 9 said, come and see me. I mean, is that luck? I think that's luck. Pure luck. I mean, I didn't go there in any way or form for that reason. I just happened to be there for 1 week when Alan Jones was in town, Andrew Slack was in town, David Gingell, the head of 9, was in town, and they gave me they'd seen me on Channel 4 in England, and they gave me a test match. He said, cover the next test for us. I said, well, I can't. I'm flying back to, whatever. And he said, cover the next test match. And for some reason it worked. I've got it. It was the Pakistan tour had finished. And that's why I flew to watch the Rugby World Cup. That was it. So I was able to stay, and I did a test match in Brisbane. And then they asked me to do another. I think that's luck.
You think so? But it's amazing how luck happens to people that are good at what they do.
Well,
I mean,
that's an interesting thesis, actually, that you could write quite an interesting essay on that, because it can't be true, because luck happens to people who start to climb the ladder.
Yeah.
So you can be down and out. You might be living in a difficult township. You might be a polite and intelligent young guy who comes to Durban Country Club and asks if he can apply for a job as a caddie. And you might end up being the caddie master and then running the front of house. That's, you're lucky if you come on the right day and you meet the right person and you get offered the first job, which is probably to clean the shoes. Who knows? I don't know. But that would prove that you don't have to have been good at something. You could have just grasped the opportunity. In fact, only last night, our director of cricket and rugby at Supersport, a guy called Alvin Naiko, was telling me the story of how he began working for Video Lab and how he applied for a job, and I think he was doing nothing more than sorting and stacking the videos or something, and he just begged for a job. And then he marched into someone's office and said, I'm better than this. And the guy said, well, what do you mean you're better than this? He said, I can edit. The guy said, really? What experience do you have? None, but I can edit. And he quickly worked out how to use, in the analog days, how to use the edit machine, how to set it 3 seconds ahead of time so he'd always be ready before anybody else with a replay. And after he got given 3 broadcast matches, whether they were Currie Cup games or not, I don't know. And the guy said, you're a genius. You can have a job with us. And he's ended up, he was head of production at Supersport, and now he directs all of our cricket, well, not all, but most of our cricket, and rugby as well. And he just pushed and made his own luck.
There you go. Mark, I was curious, I was thinking about cricket as a whole yesterday. And with the 3 different formats, we've got the World Cup on the horizon coming up shortly. I was curious as to what you think is the pinnacle of the game. What is the greatest achievement that a team can do? In what format do you think that is most relevant?
Well, it's such a changing game. I mean,
so is it to win the ODI? Is it to win the World Cup, the ODI? Is it to be the number 1 test-ranked nation?
For India, it would be to win a test series against Pakistan. But they don't play a test series against Pakistan. For England, it's to win a test series against Australia, to win the Ashes. Would you, as an England player, rather win the Ashes or win the World Cup? I think the 50-over World Cup is still considered a higher achievement than winning the T20 World Cup.
Yeah.
I suppose primarily because it's a longer form game. There's more that goes into it. Although, of course, in the nuance, there probably isn't any more that goes into it. But the length of time and the fact that across a period of 5 weeks you have to play a pretty high level of cricket probably makes that the most important. It's a shame to think. I've just written a piece about the 1975. I'm doing a 3-piece series for Cricinfo, and I've just written a piece about the 1975, the first World Cup. It lasted 2 weeks. There were 8 teams. They rushed the group stages through. Semi-finals, finals, bang, all done. Very quiet ceremony on the grass at Lord's. Duke of Edinburgh presenting the trophy to the West Indies captain Clive Lloyd, and everybody said goodbye. No one really necessarily thought it would continue forever, and here we are, about to embark on another World Cup that'll be staggeringly big, rich, huge crowds all over India. What is the... Do you know, India won in Australia 2 years ago. What an achievement that is. Winning a test series in Australia, that is hard. England have done it a few times since the war. Mid-50s under Len Hutton, then under Brearley, then under Gatting and then under Strauss, and that's it. I mean, it doesn't happen often. I don't know the answer. Actually, it's a really good question. What would be considered cricket's highest achievement? We'd have to say the 50 over World Cup right now, I think.
Do you think it would be case dependent? So, for example, if you ask a South African, I think it would be unanimous, we'd love a World Cup. But maybe you're winning a test series in India for another test playing nation. That might have never been achieved. So maybe it's a horses for courses approach?
Maybe, but then if you said to England, would you rather win the World Cup in India or win your series, your 5-match series against India in the new year, what would they say? I suppose they'd say the World Cup, would they?
I suppose so.
Really good question he's just asked.
Thank you. Mark, you've got something very exciting coming in October 2023. You're taking over as the MCC president, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And how are you feeling
Pretty
about
cool,
that?
isn't it? How do I feel about it? Greatly honoured. Absolutely staggered. Greatly honoured. I looked at the board in the committee room at Lords, and you see the names there over the years. Lots of lords and field marshals and knights and princes and prime ministers. So, you have to have a giggle to yourself.
Yeah.
Lots of great former players, some of them heroes and friends. I'd like to think that at the end of you only get 1 year. It used to be a 2-year position, and then they changed the governance of the club to have a chairman running the executive. And so the chairman sort of runs the club day in, day out, and the president is he is the leader of the club, but it's more a leading face and voice than operationally. I've got 4 particular things I'd like to get over the line that I think would improve MCC actually as a club. If I could get a couple of those done in a year, I'd be pretty happy. And if I could get the root foundation of the other 2 up and running, that'd make me pretty happy. So I don't want to just glad hand everybody, host the president's box, and I will do that to the best of my ability, and I hope we have a great fun time doing it. All of us who, guests and all of us involved. But I'd like to achieve a few things. I think MCC has not done itself a lot of favours of late. It doesn't have the best face. What is MCC now? How much relevance does it have? What sort of public perception is there of MCC? Is it fair? Is it misleading? What is MCC deep down? I'd like to try to unravel those.
Fantastic. In wrapping up, because you've got an exciting tea time, your part-time amateur golf career, I'd like to finish off with what state do you think the world of cricket is in, and what would you like to see from the world of cricket going forward?
Well, gosh, that is a big question. Let's just pick out 2 or 3 things. Firstly, cricket needs pastoral care globally.
Okay.
There's a real problem with the haves and have-nots, and if it continues, the nations without money will be so marginalised that they won't even be able to afford to play Test cricket. Worse than that, their players won't be paid enough to inspire them to want to play Test cricket. Because let's take West Indies right now, and you're beginning to see it a bit in South Africa. You can go and earn so much money in the franchise leagues and so little money playing for your country that it's getting to a point at which you're optionless for your own career and your family to choose the former. So India, which does this amazing job in the IPL has started the whole private ownership model and made it so successful. The tournament's worth so much money. The cricket in it is amazing. The crowds are amazing. It's a fantastic tournament. India has looked after test match cricket. India plays masses of test matches and will go anywhere to play them. So India's much maligned. And India's a great supporter of South Africa, by the way. But India needs to spread the riches because India will need people to play against. And India makes a lot of money of its own volition, and really money that comes through ICC events should be distributed so that everybody else gets a bigger slice of the cake. So that's one thing I think is very important. Two, I think you need to protect Test match cricket, and I suspect that it needs 2 windows a year. Maybe December, January, February perhaps, but more likely December, January, I'd say. And maybe June, July, where in southern and northern hemispheres you devote those 2 months to Test cricket, because Test cricket lays the foundation for the skills of the game. So T20 is attractive if you develop the skills of the game as a young man. So just a simple thing like a cover drive or an outswinger is probably not developed by cricketers only learning the lowest common denominator, where you clear your left side and look to hit it for 6 over wide mid-on, where you bowl Yorkers or slow ball bouncers at the death. The game needs more variety in its skills to remain aesthetically pleasing. And it's Test cricket, or the foundations for Test cricket are important. Equally, Test cricket's required because it explains what cricket's relevance is through the ages, how we got to where we are, and why cricket has various appeal, not limited appeal. So that's important. So protection of Test cricket is important. And the other thing I'd say is that the game is fighting a lot of options. It's a world that's become hugely commercial in sport, and a world that's easy to get whatever you want. So, basketball, for example, comes out of America and is enormously popular in the Caribbean. I'm just picking an example here. Football in England, enormously popular. And the consequence is it pushes the sport of cricket out of the way. In England now, there's only 2 clear months when there's no football. Football overwhelms cricket, even when cricket's being played in the other months. So cricket's place needs a greater certainty. At the moment, it's all dotted around. You never quite know when the next series or match is, who's playing who and why. So better formatting, better positioning in the calendar, better understanding of what we're playing for. At the moment, the World Test Championship is not very clear to people. Clarity. Maybe add a semi-final to the final. Maybe have a clear calendar, clear dates, clear finishing line. I think they're things that need to be addressed. I think the balance between bat and ball is very important. Gosh, I said I'd pick 2 or 3 things, but I'm rabbiting on. It's absolutely crucial you have low-scoring games and high-scoring games. The ball has to have its say. It can't just be the bat every day having its day. And that's a very important part of how we look at cricket going forward. Pitches, I don't think you want to overdo home advantage. I think if you go to England and you're given a real green top where it zips around all over the place, that's not ideal. And I don't think it's ideal to go to the subcontinent and get something that from the first ball turns square. I think it doesn't help to have touring sides come and get humiliated on your own patch. So all those things are important, and the game has to believe in itself and trust itself. I think it does that enough, and the game has to make sure it gets other people to think the same way.
In your book, once again, you had the privilege of meeting first of all, interviewing Tiger Woods and then meeting him and getting to chat to him in a little bit more length at an airport. My question to you would be, has there been a guest, somebody that you've had to interview, where you've been in awe of them, if you've been starstruck?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. I made a real mess of an interview with the Duke of Edinburgh. I didn't like him, and I got it wrong, and it was actually very immature of me, and I wasn't properly prepared, and I couldn't see why we were doing it. It was for Channel 4 cricket, and then, of course, when I sat in front of him, I suddenly thought, oh my goodness me, because he was intelligent, much smarter than me, quickly worked out I hadn't done my homework. So that was part immature, silly really, and part overawed. Mick Jagger.
Really?
Yeah, I've interviewed Mick a few times, but I know Mick, so I shouldn't have been overawed. But actually, when the moment came, again, very interesting, I hadn't done enough background work. I've done him twice on TV and once on radio, and I didn't get it right. Now, if I did it now, I'd be fine. But he's quite intimidating. He's very intelligent and not a sufferer of fools. I'm not saying I was a fool, but I wasn't at my best. A few prime ministers. One of the Australian prime ministers intimidated me, Tony Abbott. Others didn't. John Howard, easy. Actually, all the other Australian prime ministers I interviewed were easy. Tony Abbott didn't look to me like he thought I should be there. And that just freaked me out a bit. Why is an Englishman in the chair of Australians televised cricket? What's that about, type of thing.
How do you deal with those nerves?
Badly. I'm not, I get a bit of anxiety. I'm not good nervous either. I think nerves are an obstacle. A lot of people think you need nerves to perform at your best. I couldn't disagree more. I am not good with nerves. I'm not. If I'm not nervous, I will be at my best.
Really?
It's simple as that, yeah.
So when you go onto live TV now and when you're interviewing different guests, for the most part, as a rule of thumb, you're not nervous?
No, I'm fine now.
Fine.
I'm fine now. But if you gave me... I've interviewed Michael Parkinson and David Frost, but they were friends of mine and sort of mentors in a way, and I didn't feel intimidated, which is interesting because I was comfortable. My interviews with Tiger were... one was after winning the Australian Masters, so of course he's super happy. And we joked around a bit and it was fine. And then I interviewed him the following year when he came back under contract to play in the Australian Masters again. And of course, his world had fallen apart over the previous 11 months. And that was a much trickier interview. But I interviewed him on stage with Shane Warne. So having the two of them together gave Warne became a bit of a crutch in the interview, and in fact we got warmed up, and Tiger, Warney was quite funny, and by the end Tiger was very good, and steely-eyed. When I asked him if he could possibly at this stage of his life get better, he looked at me like, I'm sorry, and he just gave me the steeliest look. He said, don't worry buddy, I'm getting better, I got a long way to go. Tiger's a very imposing person, but quite fun too. The next morning I saw him on the putting green and I went up and said hi. He said, hey buddy, how you going? Great fun last night, all that stuff. And, what are you up to? And I said, oh, well, I'm calling the golf today. He said, great. I said, what are you working on? He said, normal stuff, trying to get a roll on the ball. So I'm having a little chat to Tiger while he's... So I said, what about all your travel, How do you sleep? You came in, you did the interview, he said, sleeping pills, just like you, I should think, And And then I said, still knocked, Dormicon? He said, yeah, still knocked, whatever I'm allowed to do. You got to be careful these days, And then, what was the next question? Then I said, oh, that's right. I said, 4 a.m. What do you do at 4 a.m? He said, watch cricket. That's right. And he watches cricket. He loves cricket. He found it fascinating. In fact, at the airport, when I met him, after the golf event, he asked me about, particularly about bowlers and impact, landing impact, joints, hips, knees, ankles. He asked me about Adam Gilchrist hitting home runs, and he'd heard something about this guy Shane Warne.
Of course.
And I said, yeah, well, let's leave that to imagination.
Mark, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed our time together. I wish you all the best on your future ventures. Good luck in October. And I look forward to hearing and seeing you on my TV screen in cricket games in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, South Africa.
Wait, whoa. Before you go, did you enjoy that episode as much as I did? If you did, please go onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify, whatever medium you're using to listen and watch the show, and click subscribe, leave a comment, leave a rating, follow the show. Every little bit counts. The more people that do that, the more value I can produce to you by getting better guests on the podcast, and then we can all keep growing and learning together. Thanks so much. Have a great day.